Get 15% off a set of Brake Mess Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Are you ready, kids? Get your parents' permission, check your mailbox, and grab your shopping cart. It's time for the Adventures in Collecting podcast.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Dave. Welcome to Adventures in Collecting, where we talk toy news, culture, and hauls,
along with our journeys as collectors.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Adventures in Collecting. In this special episode, you are going to hear an exclusive, or see an exclusive, depending on where you're enjoying this episode, an exclusive interview that Dave had with our friends at the Nacelle Company. They recently produced a documentary called Mike Mignola, Drawing Monsters, The Secret Origins of Hellboy. And Dave had the opportunity to sit down with the filmmakers of that documentary, Jim Demonakos and Kevin Konrad Hanna. This documentary airs, or premieres, I should say, September 17th on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV, and features never-before-seen interviews with the likes of Guillermo del Toro, Mike Mignola himself, as they discuss the origins of Hellboy and how he went from being on the sketchboard to a beloved, I guess you could say, cult classic icon from across different mediums. Of course, we've got the comics, the graphic novels, the films series, the animated films. There's a lot of Hellboy out there, and he's become over the years a beloved character. So I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna kick it over to Dave, and you're gonna hear directly from the filmmakers themselves. And once again, a reminder, definitely, if you are a fan of Hellboy, if you are a fan of Mike Mignola's art, you want to check out Drawing Monsters, The Secret Origins of Hellboy, once again on September 17th on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV. Dave, take it away.
So, as we are a podcast about collecting, what are you guys currently collecting?
So, I see your t-shirt, and I actually went last night to the screening of Batman with the Penguin sneak peek, just so I could pick up the Bat Signal popcorn bucket.
Nice.
Which literally is, there's nowhere to put popcorn in it. It's just a Bat Signal. And it's very cool, but then they just give you the popcorn separately. And there's actually no container whatsoever for you to put popcorn in the Bat Signal. I don't know if that's exactly what you meant, but going out of your way for nerd stuff, I think it was relatable to all of us.
Absolutely counts, yeah. Especially with some of those buckets they've been putting out lately with the Wolverine one or the Alien, the Xenomorph head, like. I actually don't know how they get popcorn in those, in any of those.
Yeah, it's wild.
We're just going to keep going, and pretty soon it's just going to be like a full body size xenomorph, and they'll be like, "It's a popcorn bucket." And you're like, the arms raised, the popcorn bucket to that
in the theater for the popcorn bucket and that's how they get you. And it's like,
you get an extra seat.
It'll talk. It'll be able to be posable. It'll do everything except hold popcorn.
I mean, but the genius idea there is that instead of acid, it could drool butter onto your popcorn.
Oh,
there you go.
That should have been the move. It's just replacing.
I'm not saying I'm a genius or anything, but
this is how it started.
This is, you heard it here first.
Yeah, AMC Regal, free ideas.
I'll be taking notes.
In 3 years, when there's another Aliens movie, I just need a butter dribble from that mouth. Anyway. How about you, Kev? What are you reading lately?
I just grabbed the first issue of X Factor from Mark Russell and Bob Quinn, and I loved it. It was great. It was an excellent take on kind of the classic X Factor, which was like they were the Incognito. Originally, sorry, I'm getting deep into X lore, but originally they were pretending to be mutant hunters, and then later they were conscripted by the government. And now this is like the new reality show version of the X Factor. So it's like they know they're the C team of the X-Men, and so it's a lot of fun. And of course, jumping on with a first issue, you're always hoping it takes off a little bit. But then also, just as a genuine Mike Mignola fan, I am still like actively looking and hunting for all those like classics, Legends of the Dark Knight, and the stuff, the pre-Hellboy stuff, to continue to pad out my Mignola Marvel and DC collection.
Yeah, I got to look back in my long boxes to see if I have those Legends of the Dark Knight, because I know I was reading that at an age that was entirely too young to be reading it. But at the same time, I know I have a good handful of those early like waves of Legends of the Dark Knight. So getting into the documentary, what was the most interesting thing you learned about Mike Mignola's career?
Just how much cocaine was a part of it was like. I'm just kidding. He has never, to our knowledge, ever done cocaine. To be honest, I actually did not realize. It's a funny thing because, if you're a certain age, which is younger than us. I won't lump you in, Dave. I don't know how old you are, but I'll just I'll only speak for Kevin and myself.
I'm 43. So
43. Okay, you're ballpark. Like I turned 47 next month. Like Kevin is a spry 29. And so if you're a certain age, Hellboy has always existed. Right? Like if you think about anybody born after 1994, Hellboy has just always been around. To them, it's no different than Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or anybody. That character has just existed. And I think there's even though my first Mignola comic was Fawford and the Grey Mouser, even though knowing Mignola did stuff before Hellboy, really researching and talking to him was how much work he actually did before Hellboy came into this world. That was the thing that I was like, oh yeah, like, he did this and he did this. You're like, of course. But then he did this and this and this and Rocket Raccoon and he did these 3 issues of the Hulk. And you're like, oh wait, he did way more than I thought in terms of his career. And so that was for me one of the just eye-opening, both in research and also just talking to him about it, because he's like, I did this. And you saw the doc, so it's like, oh yeah, I was struggling doing this, I was doing that. And then I went over to DC and I did this and that. You're like, oh wow, like there's so much more. But then when that switch flipped and it became Hellboy, to me, Mike Mignola is Hellboy, and that's what he's done. Not that he hasn't done anything else, but that is it. So that's my answer. Kevin?
Oh, I mean, I think Rocket Raccoon was a good one. Guardians of the Galaxy would likely not have Rocket Raccoon in it if it wasn't for Mike Mignola turning a character that had only been in the background of a couple issues into a regular Marvel character. That was really fun. The weird dominoes of like, he was part of the process that tripled Doja Cat's popularity, like little weird things, because she dressed up as a character from Atlantis that he helped design, and then that kind of helped put her on the map as an internet thing. But I think the more real answer is the fact that it took him a while to find his voice. And so we all know Mike is like one of the strongest voices in comics, and it's like one of the first artists that people see and they recognize. They go, I know that's Mike Mignola. But it took him almost 20 years to get to that point. And a lot of it was trial and error. And a lot of it, in his words, was failure, like things that he would try and didn't work, or things that he would get put on and it didn't work out. And I think the really awesome and beautiful story was his long journey to find his place to be the very, very important and iconic artist that he is.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see because, as someone who's kind of grew up in that time where, Hellboy is a thing that I know, remember when Dark Horse was basically like new, and it was an indie publisher. So I didn't know he did all this mainstream stuff, and I didn't know he helped design Atlantis. Like, as a Disney, self-admitted Disney fan, like, had no clue. So learning all this extra stuff and how kind of much it's kind of changed the course of almost how we think about a lot of mainstream stuff. His style, it was really interesting to see. It was really cool. And then, yeah, like you were saying, that just never giving up. It almost like reminded me like it could kind of double up with the Sparks documentary that Edgar Wright did, of just two forms of entertainment, of just never give up, because it'll happen, and you just got to keep going. And that was, I think, like a running theme too from a lot of the people that were interviewed in the documentary. They talked about how Hellboy resonated with them and why it resonated with them. There were a bunch of really great stories in there. How does Hellboy and in turn Mike Mignola's journey resonate with you guys?
I think it's the story of an outsider. And, I think that it, in the movies, Hellboy is definitely like portrayed as like this, freak and outsider, and less so in the comics, but the comic itself is a comic book that's kind of off to the side. There's the big pillars of Marvel and DC, and then off to the side is this pulpy horror comic that has a really small but devout and passionate following, and so it's like the comic book for outsiders in a lot of ways. And I think Mike is the first to say that he kind of grew up as a kind of a nebbish person who would sit alone and draw and read, and a lot of people see themselves in that, and a lot of people can relate to that, and all of us are from some circle, some group, something where we feel like we don't always fit in, and we're trying to find our place, and that's absolutely Hellboy. He's just a normal guy trying to fit in, but he has this like hellish destiny to be the beast and all these other things, and he kind of tries to say, no, I'm just me, And I think that a big part of that was also Mike, is like, people will kind of bring a lot to him and be like, oh, you were the savior of comics, and you were most graphic and iconic, and he is all those things, but he's like, yeah, I'm just a guy splashing ink on a page type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely that humble factor that kind of keeps it grounded too. Jim, what about you?
I think that the thing that we did throughout our interviews and talking to all of these creative people is that there is essentially, like, without being too deep about it, it's like a meditation on creativity. The film lets you think about that if you pursue the thing that you love, there can be an audience for it. And it felt very empowering to watch this film from that lens, to say that not only is this a film about Mike and his journey, but that you could see so many other people following along in his wake, that this can be your journey as well if you want it to be. You can be a creative, and you can take your destiny into your own hands. And there's a lot of things that fall into it, right? And I'm definitely not saying that you will achieve the level of success that Hellboy has, because, as you know, for anything, there's timing and luck and all these other factors. But it really starts with you, and you doing the work, and you putting your creative voice out into the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that really brings that home is just so many people in different creative fields. There were people who were animation, film, comics. Like, it just wasn't everybody in like the comic book world, and it was stuck in this one box. His career and the creations and the art and all that has really resonated with people across the spectrum of creativity, which I think was another really powerful piece to the documentary.
Yeah, I feel as though you don't realize, kind of going back to one of your first questions, like, what was surprising, but, I kept it to just comics, but it's also as we delve deep into how influential Mike is across multiple fields of creativity. He's not just a comic book influencer. He is his art has touched people whose fingers are in every creative field, from, like you said, animation, illustration, concept art, movies, and comics. And that was really, really interesting to see how deep his roots actually spread to help people in those other fields.
Yeah, and I mean, the influence is huge, and I thought one of the cool things was, like, he didn't want everybody to be him. It was like, do this your own way. But with that said, he still has, Mike Mignola still has one of the more distinct visual styles in art and in comics. What do you think has made that stand the test of time the way it has?
I think that he just did what he did. I think the fact that he just kept carving out something that was his vision. He definitely has a lot of influences. He loves Frank Frazetta. He talks about how he used to watch those art house or German expressionism films as a kid in San Francisco. But that all kind of just became part of the soup, and then he kept pushing to the things that he liked and was passionate about. And instead of him chasing down, he could have tried to be like Neil Adams or like even Bernie Wrightson, who is a big influence on him, but he's like, I'm not Bernie Wrightson. I am me. And all those different influences kind of come in one side and all get blended according to his passions. And so I think instead of him trying to like adjust for audiences or do what's popular or draw for other people, I think he draws for himself. And I think that's what made it so distinct and so interesting. And he's very iconic, but I also think he's someone that if he's not for you, he's not for you. You know what I mean? If your preference is a different type of style, there's no version of that where it's like, okay, here's the My Little Pony version of Mike Mignola, and here's the super accessible, this version of Mike Mignola. It's like, this is what he does, and he does it very, very well.
Yeah. Brian and I were actually talking about it before you guys jumped on. He's one of those artists where everybody knows Mike Mignola, but I don't think they all realize they do.
Yeah.
Like, everybody will know it. It's like, I know it when I see it, but like, for sure, it's just one of those styles that just jumps out at you.
Well, and I think I think people of like Jim and I's age, he was back when artists I guess they still do this, but where Mike was doing covers for like Marvel and DC, he was one of the first artists that you learned to recognize the style of, because it's so distinct and so unique. You'd see a cool cover and it was like, and 70%, 80% of the page is all black and there's not a lot of cross hatching. It's just super, super graphic. You're like, that's a Mike Mignola page.
Yeah, for sure. Jim, what do you think?
So, really taking what Kevin said to another level too, it's what is distinct about Mike is that he's a blend that no one had seen before, and I think his writing is actually just as important as his artwork, because there's a sparseness even to his writing that looks a lot like his artwork, where he's not doing hyper detail. Like, he's not Art Adams, right? Art Adams is hyper detailed, and Mignola is the opposite. They're both cartoonists, and they're both people who convey exactly what they want on the page, but they do it in such different manners. Mike is kind of like a reductionist, and he's really in a way a caricature artist, because he gives you the the impressions of the body, the impressions of what he wants to convey in his artwork, more so than anybody else in comics. And speaking from the writing point of view, he also, there's no like pop culture references. He doesn't make it so that, all the kids are talking about Riz, and so I'm going to use that as a word inside. None of that. And so what's interesting about reading a Hellboy comic, from no matter what part of it, it never feels tied to a certain time except for its actual location in the story. So you can read it over and over without it actually feeling dated. And I think that's an incredible talent that is really underappreciated for Mike, is how his stuff transcends time, both illustratively and from his writing.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
This segment is brought to you by our friends at Chubsy Wubsy Toys. A traditional mom-and-pop toy store in Little Falls, New Jersey, Chubsy Wubsy Toys brings you the best new toys from the brands you love without the hassle of pounding the pavement searching for them at larger retail stores. Visit them in person at their brand new home at 101 Newark Pompton Turnpike, Suite 1 in Little Falls, New Jersey, or online at chubsywubsy.com. That's CHUBZYWUBZZY.com. And tell them Adventures in Collecting sent you.
O'Reilly.
You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, and it's also interesting as someone who kind of, is a pretty big fan of the movie or the Del Toro movies. We saw a lot from Guillermo del Toro in the documentary, and I think he was the one who said, like, he went from being like somebody in the comic who said like one word sentences to how do we make him have dialogue. What were some of the major takeaways you got from seeing how Hellboy from the page to a cinematic experience kind of panned out?
It's been really interesting. I will say that they feel different. And I think that's sort of the crux of a lot of the conversations we ended up having with Mike and Guillermo inside of the documentary too. It's like at a certain point you have to realize that feature films are completely different than comics. There is no one-to-one comparison. Hellboy had to talk more. You can't have a leading man that just says 7 words and get people to really, really be on board with it. And so it was really interesting to see that it really was Guillermo's version of Hellboy that he put on the screen. It wasn't Mike's Hellboy. Mike was the source material. Mike was the ingredients. And Guillermo made a much different omelet than Mike makes for comics, and even the David Harbour version or this brand new version, which we haven't seen. All of those are still based off of the same ingredients, but they're all making completely different sausage.
Yeah, for sure. Kevin, what did you think of like kind of that whole cinematic era?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about Jim's Hellboy sausage.
Spicy red sausage.
Spicy red, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely. It's like when you read the comic, there's so much control. Every frame, you can do vertical frames. The layout of the page, it is its own art. It's absolutely its own distinct art form with all these different elements. but then suddenly you introduce movement and timing and music and voice inflections and all these different things. It doesn't matter who does it and how faithful they try to be. There's so much interpretation that needs to happen. And you know, Mike and Guillermo overlapped so well, so much. Like, you know, I think it was it Guillermo said, like, they overlap 90% of their tastes, their influences. And then he's like, but that 10% that's different is very big. It's a very big 10%. And so, you know, when you watch the film, like I rewatched the first film recently, and I was surprised how faithful it was, how much of the actual comic was in there, but it still feels like it's completely its own thing. So I feel like if you like the movie, you're probably going to like the comic a lot too. But it becomes, it's, you know, it's one is like, you know, it's like Nirvana Unplugged versus the album edition, right?
Yeah,
some
totally.
version of that. Yeah.
All right, so it was the documentary itself is, you know, just shy 90 or just over 90 minutes, and it's a jam-packed 90 minutes, but it is, you know, it's a breeze of 90 minutes for sure. Was there anything that was like, this is a story that I want to include, but just like time constraint wise or flow wise, like it just didn't work?
Kevin.
Oh, sure. I mean, I there was so much, and I think Jim and I talked about this recently, which was, there was, once we were done and we're like, this is the story, this is Mike's story, and we put it in a nice cohesive thing. More things kept happening. You know, Mike got a tattoo. He got a tattoo with Katie, his daughter, of the symbols from their story that they wrote together. And I'm like, oh, that would have been really cool. And so, like, a lot of it, like, as once we finished the documentary, I think there was more that we wanted to add in. There was so many things that we just kind of sprinted through that we really loved, and like they were really, really interesting. You know, the Hellboy animations that Tad Stones have done. Like, there was a lot of really, really cool elements that we just go, okay, cool, checkbox, and keep running. Yeah, and a lot of weird things. There was I keep mentioning it just because it's so quirky and everyone should Google it, but the Hellboy K-pop song, where the lead singer is dressed up as Hellboy, and that was just, it came out right after we wrapped, and I was like, oh, that's so weird and interesting. I wanted it at the end when we were doing the medley of Hellboy Worldwide with like the Hellboy wrestler in Japan and all the other different elements, you know. But I'll let Jim talk because he has some interesting things about this as well.
So for me, I think it was our first cut of the film was a lot longer, not surprisingly. Like the director's cut, I wouldn't even call it the director's cut because we didn't finish a lot of it. What we had was like, okay, almost 80 hours of film. Like, we did a lot of interviews. And sometimes it's hard, you know, you can do a 2-hour interview and there's a 2-minute clip that survives. That's just the way it is when it comes to documentaries. So when we put our first cut together, it's very long. It's honestly pretty boring. And we had to start trimming and trimming and trimming to get it down to that 94 minutes that feels breezy and good. Like, there's a lot of things that were left on the cutting room floor where we wanted to expand upon. Like, for example, I'll use this one, which is we had a whole section of how interesting all the other characters that Mike has created are. You know, we obviously focus on Hellboy, but, you know, Abe Sapien is an incredible character. Johan is an incredible character. Liz Sherman is an incredible character, et cetera, et cetera. And we had Roger the Homunculus. You have all these crazy good characters that have come out of this man's brain. And we had a whole section because as we were doing interviews, we would ask someone like Rebecca Sugar, like, hey, Rebecca, who's your favorite Hellboy character that's not Hellboy? And she's like, I love Roger. Like, oh, and why? Okay, and she would talk about why. And so we had a whole section that was all these pretty awesome people talking about their favorite Hellboy characters. But what happened is that every time you got to that section, which was, I would say, no more than 4-ish minutes long, maybe 5 at most, you would it felt like the brakes were put on during the documentary as you're watching it. Because we couldn't figure out why. As you're watching it as a whole, we're like, it kind of lags here. It's got problems there, etc. As we're cutting it through, and we realize that it's a lot of people throwing a lot of new information and new characters at the audience, with the payoff really being Mike created a lot of cool characters.
Yeah.
So we could summarize that 5-minute section when we had someone mention, like, there's I think it was Katie O'Brien, the Hellboy editor, talked about a bunch of the characters. We showed the pan art, and that was it. Because then all she had to do was say, he's created so many great characters, X, Y, Z, etc. And then you could move on. So the audience didn't have to be like, okay, so now there's this guy, he's Abe Sapien. Okay, now, all right, now there's this person. And so that's, I think, my best example of a thing that was I thought was very good, but didn't really actually help the story of the documentary or the story of Mike. And so those are the kind of choices that we had to make. And again, like shaving. And eventually we got to this 94 minutes where we felt like it was very breezy, and you could watch it and feel like, oh, okay, you're not, everything is introduced. And everything is explained when there's things that we didn't think people, like, for example, like, what's an inker? A casual person might have heard the term, but they don't know. And so we made sure to have, like, Mike Carlin be like, hey, can you explain what an inker is? And because there's a big difference between Mike being the penciler and Mike being an inker. And so we wanted to make sure that people understood. It's like, oh, I get it. That's the different levels of what it is in making comics.
And full disclosure, like the Chasing Amy definition is like literally what the majority of people, like, one of the big takeaway lines from that movie. So it's what people know of as an inker. So it's also a good educational piece for people to see, like, oh no, this is what it is.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that Chasing Amy clip actually fit in so well, is to be like, and we know it as well, talking to non-comic reading friends. That definition of inker is what I would say most people who don't have any idea how a comic is made think of it. And so we were like, here's what it isn't, and now let's tell you what it is.
Yeah, definitely one of the things that we've got to look up, and we'll try to put it in like a story, or when we post that the episode's up, is that the K-pop song and the wrestling match for sure. Like that'll definitely hit with the audience for sure.
Sorry, I have to add a little bit.
No, go ahead.
Jim and I were such big fans that, like, when we started, I think the easy thing for us to do is for us to do something that Jim and I will mention a lot, is just Wikipedia the movie, where you just list everything the person worked on and talk about everything and talk about how great it was. And we were already massive Mike Mignola fans, and we knew a lot of people that were going to watch us were massive Mike Mignola fans. And so what we kind of wanted to do was a film that anyone could watch and take Mike's story away from it. But kind of like the thing I thought of is, I want the film that I could show someone and say, this thing is important to me, and by watching this film, you'll understand why it's important too. And that was kind of the approach in my head, was like, could I show this to someone who has never heard of Mike, maybe not a comic book fan, and walk away with an understanding of Mike's impact, not on just the world of comics, but the world of culture,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a major impact on pop culture. And I do think it's got that ability to cross over and be something that you could watch even if you're not into comics. Absolutely. So one of the things that we saw, and I think it was like kind of briefly in the end with the world's view, like when it was, Hellboy Worldwide, we saw some of the toys and collectibles from the Hellboy universe. We are an action figure collecting podcast, so we've got to talk about it briefly. Some of that was shown in the documentary. What were some of your favorite pieces that you saw or that you encountered while putting this together?
Oh, I have an answer for that, but Jim's going to talk, so I want to say the right name for it.
Okay. So for me, let's see. In terms of the coolest, we saw some. This goes into the movie stuff. We definitely saw a bunch of props, which was great. We got to go to Adam Savage's warehouse workshop, and he had all kinds of Hellboy props. From a toy and collectible point of view, I think there's the Eric So Hellboy is one of the coolest. It's actually pretty hard to find, but when you do, you should look it up. It's kind of almost like a fully round Hellboy. He made it so different than every other interpretation of Hellboy, and that's what I love, is like looking at something that's not normal, not just like a good sculpt or a good interpretation. This was like the vibe of Hellboy in a completely different way. He also, that same guy did a really good Marv from Sin City that you should look up as well. So like it's got a fully removable trench coat, and just this cool vinyl figure. It's got like an actual cross. His cross that he's wearing is also removable. There's also a Japanese robot Hellboy that was just released earlier this year that I bought. And that also has a removable trench coat, 2 different heads, and a couple of arms, or a couple of different of the right hand of Dooms. And it's honestly one of the coolest things. I think you can still get it at like Big Bad Toy Store.
Okay.
So those are the ones that I would definitely I would go to people's houses and then be like, how do I get one of those? Because that's awesome. And then go look it up and try to find it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's collection is kind of how we all find new stuff and figure out what new stuff
You're
is.
like, oh, that thing. This is so cool.
Yeah. Kevin, what was yours?
Sure. Okay, well, I'm going to go back in time. So I'll start with most recent. The one that just came out that I actually took a bunch of pictures of at San Diego Comic-Con this year was the Hellboy 30th Anniversary Deluxe Vinyl. And there's a color version, there's a black and white version, and I'm still not sure which one I want more. But it's really cool. It actually has like an attachable corpse from the Hellboy story, The Corpse. And they did a really good job making it feel like Mike's shapes and dimensions. So I think if you lit that thing dramatically, it would actually look like a Mike Mignola drawing. Really excited about that one. Going back, the toy line that I really, really loved was the 2005 Mexico Hellboy toy line. And they're just weird and awesome and ugly and beautiful. Like they're not quite on model, but there's something really interesting about them. I love the Liz Sherman and the Lobster Johnson especially. And then going all the way back when I was a very poor teenager, I remember saving up my money and buying the Randy Bowen Abe Sapien bust. And I remember like that was such a big purchase for me at the time because it was like all my allowances and mowing lawns and all that stuff. And that one was like super, super, super important for me. But yeah, we got to see so much cool stuff. I mean, and then, you're like, oh, I have this collectible action figure. And you go to someone's house and they're like, here's the master cast and the original sculpture. And
oh, that's wild.
It was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing. We got to basically see all the coolest and best and original stuff. It was great. But yeah, I think probably Adam Savage's takes the cake as far as all his actual real props from the movie, and then also replicas that he made. I think the most iconic would be that he made the glove, Rasputin's glove that summoned Hellboy to Earth. And he's done some videos about they're pretty amazing.
Yeah, I thought the other cool thing too was like, oh, Tara McPherson's in this. Like, oh, I wonder if she did a little. Yeah. Oh yeah, there it is. Like,
yeah. Oh my god,
I
forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, that was an important one for us to fit in there because it was a really cool toy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the way she kind of almost like reinvents stuff in a way. Like it was really cool to see that. This started as a Kickstarter, and ultimately Nacelle also hopped on board. Was this the first time working with Nacelle, and what was it like partnering with them on the project?
Yeah, this is our first time working with Nacelle. They were introduced to us through one of our EPs, Adam F. Goldberg. So shout out to Adam. Thank you very much. And it's been great. We've never going the self-funding route is a lot of work, and it's also a lot of reward, which is great. But it came to the point where we went about as far as we could by ourselves. And then now with Nacelle on board to get the film out to a wider audience, that's the thing we're most excited about, is that, ever since it came out, everybody who backed it on Kickstarter got to see it. And then they'd tell friends, we'd tell people like, hey, we made a film. Like, oh, and of course, the first question is, when can I see it? Where can I see it? And we're always like, soon, we're working on it, and it's hard because after a while, like, people only have so much attention span too. And it's like, oh, I did this thing. Cool. Can I see it? No, not yet. Okay. Well, remind me again. And then like, it sort of fades away. And it hasn't been that long, but we're really excited for, to kind of keep continuing this journey with Nacelle and be able to get it out so that it can finally, on September 17th, we're pretty stoked that everyone's going to be able to finally watch it.
All right. Last question that I have, and then we'll get to the important thing, which is plugging the movie. If you could get people to take away one thing from watching Drawing Monsters, what would it be?
I think for me, it was, I'm just echoing Mike's message from it, which was that it doesn't matter how weird or unique your idea is, give it a shot. Mike took a devil character named Hellboy and turned it into the third biggest comic book franchise, but also just the most unique and artistic and cool thing out there. Because he kind of fought for his voice and just kept trying. And I think this film, if it's anything, is a call to arms for you to create your own.
I think my very, very, very similarly, again, it's that creativity is not one thing, and that you can do exactly what you want and put it out into the world and have that be your calling card. Like that one time, even if it doesn't become your career, but at least one time you went out there and you did exactly what you wanted to do and put out exactly the thing that you wanted to see exist in the world. And I hope that's what people take away, that you can do that too.
Awesome. Yeah, it's such an inspiring documentary. Like I'm so excited for people to be able to see it. But before we go, Jim, Kevin, how can we find you guys on social media, and how can we see the movie?
So for me, I'm just Jim Demonakos on all social medias. Feel free to give me a shout on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, you name it. We also run the Mignola Doc Twitter and Instagram as well, so people can follow that. For the movie, it's MignolaDocumentary.com. It's out September 17th on all streaming platforms, Apple, Amazon, Vudu, YouTube, you name it. Like it's going to be out there. So if you can find it in your heart to support us, we would super appreciate it. By you supporting us, we can make more documentaries like this. Kevin?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm Frog Children across social media, so just literally that. Maybe a little bit inspired by Mike Mignola's very cool frogs. And I'll just echo what Jim said. It's like, yeah, check out the film. The people who were able to see it, the very small group of people that were able to see it at film festivals and that supported the original film, it seemed to really connect with people. So I hope you can check it out and connect with it as well.
All right, Jim, Kevin, thank you very much, and thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having us, Dave. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, dear listener, for hanging out with us today. Subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen, and then tell your friends to do it. Thanks also to Joe Azari, the golden voice behind our intro. Our music is Game Boy Horror by the Zombie Dandies. Find more about them both on our show notes.
Follow us on social media at AIC_podcast on Instagram and Twitter. Stop by and say hi, show us your toy hauls, and share your toy stories. Maybe we'll talk about it in a future episode.
Don't try this at home. Void where prohibited and some assembly required. Each sold separately, not a flying toy. Consult a physician if your toy run exceeds more than 4 hours.
This has been a non-productive media presentation. Executive producer Frank Hablawi. This program and many others like it on the Non-Productive Network is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Please share it, but ask before trying to change it or sell it. For more information, visit Non-Productive.com.
Get 15% off a set of BrakeBest Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Oh, O'Reilly Auto Parts.